Welcome to the 4F, 4Fs with Jeff.
I'm Jeff Clough, and welcome back to the 4Fs podcast. On this episode, we uncover how candid conversations and unexpected pivots reveal our greatest strengths. Today, I'm joined by Mike Owen, once a grocery store union employee. After a life-saving transfusion, pivoted into technology and spent nearly 2 decades at Microsoft. Mike is the only person I've ever spoken with to bounce back from what's known as a zero rewards end-of-year review, and ultimately how he ended up leading salary transparency talks and Friday happy hours. We'll dive into how he turned a 0% bonus into a masterclass of resilience, why he donates blood to save lives, and what it really takes to stay kind when your career feels like it's on the line. Let's dive in. Mike, thanks for making time today, man. I appreciate it. I know it's good to meet you more personally and see you today. So I know we've had a chance to talk a little bit, but I would love if you could just kind of tell us a little bit about yourself. Like, give us the background, where you're from, where you're born, where you're raised. Yeah, kind of the early years about yourself.
Well, I was born and raised in Seattle. Most of my family's from here. I grew up in Magnolia and Ballard, the kind of core communities in Seattle. Went to high school here, and high school was easy for me. I kind of skated through it, and just on kind of talent alone. And my first quarter in college was basically a review of kind of like my senior year in high school. I just killed it. I had like a 3.75. And then the second quarter was when I started taking calculus that I had not learned before. And, I actually had to apply myself and study, and boy, I flamed out, and I ended up dropping classes just to maintain my GPA. And I kind of fumbled through most of 2 years kind of doing that. And eventually it was like, this isn't working. And I was actually got a scholarship out of high school to pay for tuition, which back then was, obscenely low compared to what it is today. I mean, it was several $100s a quarter or something. It was just, so I was really lucky in that, I wasn't wasting my family's money or anything, but at the same time, I didn't really understand or respect the opportunity that I had. So after kind of, dropping out, ended up working in grocery stores for better part of 4 or 5 years. And that instilled some work ethic in me. It was really, really important in terms of benefits. So you join a grocery store, you join a union, and I got really, really sick at that time. I was diagnosed with ulcerative colitis and spent a month in the hospital, had my colon removed, and pretty big stuff. And I walked away with just a small handful of bills that I had to pay. And so really, really fortunate that I had strong medical benefits to take care of me. And really, I look back now and think, if that had happened even 20 years later, 30 years later, something like that could have just financially devastated my family if I hadn't had the right kind of insurance. So
True.
Really fortunate to kind of get through that without having to blow up life savings or anything like that. After kind of recovering, my brother, who was teaching in the Shoreline School District, called me up and said, "Hey, we're about to deploy a whole new lab of these new Mac computers, and we could use your help kind of setting it up." And I had been, since my early teens, kind of tinkering with computers, so I had a lot of kind of knowledge, and just computers came really, really easy for me. They just made sense. And so, being an introvert, I just was naturally attracted to being able to program and make these things do what I want them to do. And so I just did some part-time work helping set up the lab. And about, 6 months later, whatever, I was hired as what was called a media technician and worked full-time doing computer work. And that was, like I said, about early 90s. And so that was a really, really strong place to grow and learn. And I eventually started doing some networking stuff because we started to deploy a 10 megabit Ethernet network at the time. And so I learned a little bit about networking. And the systems engineer who was selling to us, after about 5 years at the district, said, "Hey, we've got an opening on the team here. Would you be interested in applying?" I'm like, yes, because I kind of, while I had, I had some more, I definitely had a lot more to learn. I felt like I had kind of reached my limit of what I could do, because I was on a team of that time of only like 4 or 5, but I felt like I was kind of the big fish in a small pond, and was offered a position, and then immediately realized, wow, now I am a small fish in a really, really, really big pond. And while that was intimidating, it was really exhilarating and exciting, because now I was working on a team with other engineers who knew just so much more than I did. And I had all this knowledge to gain. And it was a place where I could really kind of grow and learn and absorb a lot of great new knowledge, in addition to just, learning what it was like working for kind of a large multinational technology company. I got to travel a bit and, meet a lot of really good people. Those connections have come back and helped me time and time again. So AT&T Wireless, the company we supported, was sold, and the headquarters moved across the country. That meant, you had a choice: move or, find another job really quickly. Well, we were almost ready to have our first child, our only child, as it turned out. And it was an easy decision. Take a severance package, take some time off, go find another job eventually, and get to stay at home with our newborn, or, go back to the grind, find another job, and just immediately kind of turn over and do more work. And so took the package, and that was an awesome time. Really, the first 6 months of our daughter's life, I was at home full time, and really one of the best decisions I've ever made. So, but a severance runs out, and eventually I'm like, okay, I need some other work here. I ended up doing kind of 2 small term jobs. I worked for a really small startup that did IPv6 training. So imagine, this would have been the late 90s. So, 25 plus years ago, doing IPv6 training, which was new for a lot of people at the time. What's amazing is that IPv6 is still kind of a new technology to a lot of people, and they don't really consider where it is being used. And back then, we were like sounding the alarm bells, like, we need to do this transition because IPv4 space is running out. That was a super interesting time. Again, I got to travel. I got to do training in front of groups of people all over the country. After, I think, another short gig at a consulting company, I got a call from a former account manager from Cisco, who was now working for the Microsoft account. And he said, "Hey, Mike, I just sold the SQL Server organization a whole bunch of Cisco hardware, and they need someone with that experience and knowledge to help them deploy it. And they're looking to hire someone." So through that referral, that network, applied for it and got the position. And that was in 2006. I was never a big Windows guy or a big fan of Microsoft, but I was smart enough to realize Microsoft's a really, really big company. And even for, I was not a software developer at the time. I wasn't a program manager, which are kind of like the 2 core roles at Microsoft for individual folks. But I was smart enough to realize, even a company the size of Microsoft, there are hundreds of people that do what I do. So opportunity to move around, to learn new things, to grow my career. And so that's what I did. And I started supporting the SQL Server lab. So at the time, every product group at Microsoft kind of was their own mini company. They had their own IT staff. They purchased their own servers. They supported those servers, and they would build and test and do performance and basically manufacture their own software. So SQL Server did this, Windows did this, Office, you name it. They all had their own set of labs, and I was on this one for SQL Server. So really good experience, some challenging experiences as well. I mean, easing into another kind of big corporation, but having kind of big corporation problems with hierarchy and reorgs and lots of office moves, and really just the opportunity to join a large company, learn again, grow my skill set, learn new stuff, and know that I'd have an opportunity to move to other teams and do, other work and expand my knowledge was really one of the key things that attracted me to Microsoft.
That's awesome, man. Really great background. There are a couple things you mentioned here that stood out to me. Talked a little bit about your life, and you said, for a minute I kind of lost my way. And I was wondering if you could dive into that just a little bit, about what you mean by losing your way. And then the second thing, maybe this is easier to do first, is for those who aren't aware, if you could give us a little breakdown of what IPv4 versus IPv6 was and is, like kind of what the problem that you were seeing back then was, and then how that's shaken out.
I think you're referring to the time in college when, to be clear, I never graduated with a degree. I've kind of told the story about my career, and I make a point of mentioning, hey, you don't need a degree to be successful in this industry. Although a lot of places now, almost require it, but most places that I apply to, at least for the networking space, it is, bachelor's degree or equivalent. And so that's never been an issue for me. I'm a big proponent of, trade schools are perfectly fine and great way to get an education and actually establish a career that can serve you well. So we need to do better at kind of looking for talent and hiring for talent. So college just wasn't for me. I was definitely not mature enough to be successful at it. And I don't know if I eventually would have, gotten a degree if I kind of stuck at it long enough, but I really felt like I was just wasting my time. Not to say that getting an education is a waste, but for me, it just wasn't the right place to be at that time. And so I think if I'd, gone back to school now, I would have a completely different mindset. And
what would that be? What would your mindset be now? You mentioned
it would be I would be focused on, okay, what am I getting out of this? What do I need this degree? Why do I need a degree? Okay, then what are the steps necessary to get to that degree? And so while I've been a network engineer my entire career at Microsoft, I've naturally kind of gravitated towards a lot of, by necessity, project management. And so I'm really, really good at organizing large, complex projects and understanding dependencies and making sure we get to the right deadlines. So I would come in with a plan, focused, and do what I needed to do in order to get to the other side. I found that the experience that I've gotten as I've gone along has really served me well, and really that's what has enabled me to get the positions and move along from different jobs or different career, different companies from here. And as an extension, that is what I focus on when interviewing people as well. A degree is great. It shows that you've got, you've put in the time to do the study, but that is only one part of what I consider to be kind of a three-legged stool when evaluating talent. The second is experience. Tell me about the relevant experience you have, because that will tell me, will you be successful in this role? And then the third thing, the third leg, which I think is the most important part after education and experience, are the soft skills that you bring to the role. And so we could have a whole nother conversation about how I feel about hiring for soft skills versus hard skills. But the education is only really one leg. And in my opinion, it is the least important factor in considering when hiring somebody.
That's a good point. I think that's fair. Thanks for going off on that little detour for a minute.
I think I answered the question about getting kind of lost.
Sure. That was awesome.
Yep. So IPv4 was developed I think originally back in the DARPA days, and really kind of came of age in education. And but when it was developed, they had to take kind of broad guesses as to like how this thing was going to get used. And so the way they designed it, the features they put in, were best guesses. And it goes down to things like, well, when it comes to like dividing up the address space, we're going to have 128 really, really large blocks of addresses for like big organizations. And Stanford University got an entire Class A. So they had, 16 million addresses. And yet, if you were a big tech company that came along later, you'd be given this tiny little bit here. And so the way they divided the address space and the protocols that they built on top of it were really kind of best guesses, because they didn't know what this would, what this protocol would do. And so when the internet exploded, and people started, consuming IPs, and ISPs started to, need more and more space, it became obvious even back in the 90s, hey, we need a different protocol, because eventually we're going to run out of the space. And they band-aided IPv4 many, many, many times, mostly through natting. And to avoid that problem. And they've done a really good job of avoiding it because there are still lots of organizations. In fact, my most recent team, we were still an IPv4 only organization because it can take a lot of work and effort to make that transition. And, there's almost always something more important, at least on leadership's list. And so unless it becomes an absolutely must do thing, a lot of times that migration never happens. But for a service provider, it's become kind of a, for example, I know that parts of Azure are IPv6 only. There simply isn't enough IPv4 space, even though they're natting multiple times within Azure. Certain data centers in parts of the world are IPv6 only. And so this company I work for recognized this need and started doing training for people to help them understand, what were the differences? What does a 120-bit address space look like? How do you do subnetting? What are some of the new features that they thought of and built into IPv6 based upon the experiences that they had with IPv4? Things like automatically assigning addresses based upon your Ethernet or MAC address was built into it. Built-in security. So IPsec is built into IPv6. It is an optional add-on. So you've got built-in security if you need it. So there are lots of other things that go along with that. Back in the day, a set of technologies called transition protocols or transition technologies were super important. So how do you get from v4 to v6? And do you dual stack? Do you use protocols? You tunnel? Do you use Teredo? There's all these other ones, and many of these are no longer in use because we've kind of cleaned up that landscape. But just understanding all these different parts of v6, how they differ from v4, and then taking people through labs where they configured networks and show them how to address interfaces was what I did for. It was only a period of about 6 months, but it was a really important time, and I got to write content and develop labs that I was later able to deliver. And when I joined Microsoft, I actually have taught v6 to a number of different groups because even then, this is kind of new. And I did this to my old organization probably 3 or 4 years ago, and for a lot of people, this was still kind of a new concept. So certain parts of Microsoft aren't there yet. If you're in Azure, I imagine it's a much more important part of it, but you'd probably be surprised how many people, when they see this weird long IPv6 address with hexadecimal characters, would look at that and go, well, what is that? I've never seen that before, because they just have never had to deal with it. Even you go home, everybody has a home network, but guess what? You're handing out RFC 1918 space, 192.168 on your home router, and you just haven't had to deal with IPv6. So it's an interesting topic because it's feeling like V4 will never go away. There'll always be pockets of it somewhere. And that's just because there isn't, this economic or, will to make the switch. And, it often comes down to money unless there's a really important,
Sure.
Economically motivated reason to do so, then if it ain't broke, don't fix it.
That's a good point. So what I heard you say is you are a college dropout and still had a really successful career in tech up to this point, and we're only partway through it. So tell me a little bit about the transition to Microsoft, and then if you can, then how did salary transparency become a key topic for you?
I was recruited to work at Microsoft by a colleague at Cisco, and Cisco, I mean, they understand their business. They want people that are friendly to their products working, in their customer base. And so obviously a former Cisco employee that not only knew the technology and the hardware, but also was predisposed to Cisco would be the perfect person to bring in. So that's how I got aware of this position. And after SQL Server, I went into, I moved on. I did progressively kind of bigger and broader roles, and I got to learn more and more technologies. And every 4 or 5 years, I just needed to move on to find something new, just kind of stretch my mind, give me more challenges because I would get sloppy and bored. And I was pretty good at that for like the first 10, maybe 15 years, 2 or 3 transitions, and I got stagnant in my last role. But that was when, during the pandemic, a lot of crazy stuff was happening. I got more concerned and was really became an advocate for mental health on my team. So immediately after like the lockdown in March of 2020, I realized, man, we need some way to just keep in touch as an organization, because now we're going to be 100% at home. So I started like a Friday afternoon virtual happy hour that went on for years, well past the time where we were actually at home. And that kind of was really the first part of kind of a theme of just understanding, hey, I'm far enough along in my career that the technology stuff, while it was still challenging, it wasn't the most important part of what I felt I could contribute to an organization. So got much more involved in working with the employee resource groups at Microsoft, which are incredible, getting involved in philanthropy and volunteering and taking a bigger part of Microsoft's Give Month, which is just an amazing time. And then eventually leading training for a lot of diversity and inclusion type stuff. And the Microsoft at the time was really kind of ramping up and doing a lot of work in that space. And that just spoke to me, and I felt there was a really, really strong desire for this. This was around the summer where George Floyd was brutally murdered. And so that kind of just lit up a light bulb in me that hey, I need to learn about this more. And so I spent a lot of time just learning and researching and becoming more involved in those efforts. And fortunately, there's a really strong program of learning and training available at Microsoft to learn things about privilege and covering. And to me, as a white man, we're kind of mostly unnoticed because I just kind of got by. And looking back in retrospect at kind of what I was learning about, I realized, yeah, I've had a really easy life compared to a lot of other people. And what I would consider to be like good timing or luck, I realized was actually just privilege, at play. And so that kind of carried me forward into just wanting to do more to reach out to people and build these communities. And one of the ways that I felt I could do something that I don't think had been addressed was around salary transparency. And it had been talked about before, but there'd be these recurring conversations on LinkedIn and other social media platforms about, we need to do better at salary transparency and talk about how much we earn so that when I'm getting an offer, I'd like to know if that's a good offer or a bad offer. And nowhere in these conversations were people actually saying, and by the way, this is what I earned and this is what, my offer was. I'm like, I'm tired of this. And I finally said, basically put my money where my mouth was. And I created a deck presentation that covered my entire career at Microsoft, and even the time before. But mostly it was focused on Microsoft because it was delivered to Microsoft employees. This is what happened to me in this year. This is my review. This is my bonus, down to the last dollar. But more importantly, as it turned out, really where I was at in my career. Why did I get that reward? What were the factors at play? What were the difficulties I was going through? This year where I had a difficult manager. So how did I deal with that? Because everybody that attended these talks, and every year, I think the second year I had this, I delivered like 6 different sections and hundreds of people at each session. And really they were like, I'm going through this now, or I have a really difficult manager that I'm having a hard time communicating with, help me understand what I can do in order to be more successful. A lot of the employees that attended were new or early in career. And if you look back at the pandemic, at one point, I heard this from leadership from high enough up that, I'm almost certain it's true, but that during the pandemic, I think half the company had been there, like less than 2 years. So if you'd been there like 3 years in 2021 or 2022, like you were an old timer. We were growing so quickly. And so all of these new employees, early in career employees, while they went through NEO, the new employee orientation, it covered kind of just the, the stuff you could probably just read online. They didn't really tell people, here's how to deal, or here's some strategies to deal with a difficult coworker, or what happens when your manager and you don't see eye to eye about your deliverables, and what happens when you get surprised during a one-on-one, or God forbid, a review where you just get blindsided by a really poor review. And so the things that I were talking about were all about, we're all kind of around those kind of unspoken topics. And it really, I think, met a need that hadn't been really discussed yet. So I did it for 3 years. I skipped a year that was really, really difficult for me. And then the next year I got so busy with work that I just delayed it and delayed it. And then that brought me to the spring of 2025. And it was May 13th. I was part of that cohort that was part of the RIF. And on Tuesday, I got the notice and was told, on Friday you lose corp access. And then on Wednesday, I woke up and thought, you know what, I've got like 4 days here to make the best use of my time. And I realized I need to do one more salary transparency talk. So updated my deck, and, I didn't have my numbers for the last year. I still don't, but I did have, the severance package. So I put that in there as well to show people this is what I was getting. On 3 days notice, with publishing the meeting to a bunch of internal resource groups, as well as to some external Facebook groups where Microsoft employees gathered. It's about 700 people joined on a Friday afternoon, my last day at Microsoft, to hear me talk for over 2 hours about this process. And so that was just an amazing experience because, as I started this talk, I let people know, hey, I was part of the layoff on Tuesday. I'm out of here and I'm doing this because I'm passionate about it. I think it's important. And just this flood of, heart emojis coming up the screen was just overwhelming. And it turned what could have been just a really miserable day in terms of, my last day at Microsoft and, the company doesn't want me, into something that was just overwhelmingly positive and uplifting. And more importantly, it made a difference, I think, to a lot of people. And so I spent the next probably 2 weeks on LinkedIn just going through hundreds of connection requests. And I've made a couple of posts since then and realized, this is obviously bigger than Microsoft, and it's something I want to take to, anybody in tech, because, a lot of the things that I went through, other people go through in other companies, people still are going through them. And I think especially now things are getting, harder and harder, and the expectations and the stakes are much higher. And so something I'm still passionate about. I want to find a way to kind of reach out to it. It's amazing to understand that your story resonates so well and people want to hear it, because most of the time you go through life and you think, yeah, I'm just me, and I stick to myself. I matter to a couple of close people, but to have that kind of feedback from hundreds and thousands of strangers was really it really spoke to me and meant a lot, especially since it was on, like I said, literally almost to the last hour of my employment at Microsoft. So it was a really cool thing.
That is cool. That feeling to realize and acknowledge, hey, yeah, I'm not alone here. That what I'm feeling is it's not isolated. Other people are here with it, and by being a little vulnerable, I can help people, and we can connect. And I think that's really important. On that note, something you mentioned was, as you got the notice that you were part of the cohort of the RIFs in May, that said, I was dealing with this feeling that I wasn't wanted by the company. And my understanding from just people I've talked with and kind of my own feeling, there's that probably goes for a lot of people. I was just curious kind of how you process through that from the company. Because
Yeah.
you dedicated how many, you were at Microsoft 18 years, is that right?
18 plus years.
18
Yeah. It was
plus
going to
years.
be 19 in July. So
your relationship with Microsoft was a full grown adult by that time. And I mean, wow, that's a lot. It's a really long time, obviously.
it is a long time. And I think probably not uncommon for someone in my generation, certainly, less common if you're a newer generation, where you tend to switch jobs more. And one of the things I made me really aware of as I went through this conversation, having such a long career, I made it really clear. It's a hard business to be in. This is a really challenging place to live in because it is so expensive. And so you've got to do what you need to do in order to be successful. So if you need a boomerang, then great. And a lot of folks, I think, in our generation will look at somebody who's done that a couple of times, and now you've got, a 32-year-old guy who's got 7 years of experience, and suddenly they're like 3 levels above you and your manager. And you think, well, what does this guy know? But he's worked the system to his advantage. So and he's doing what he needs to do to survive, because he didn't have the luxury of purchasing a house 25 years ago for pennies, and nowadays you come out of college with hundreds of $1,000s in debt. You to live anywhere close to where you're working, you're spending, $5,000 plus a month on a mortgage or rent. And just, it is so hard as young people and think, well, you're in tech, you've got it made, but no, there's just a lot of burdens that go along with it. So yeah, my story was kind of unique to me. But having that honesty and really what you said about being vulnerable, sometimes that's all that people need to hear is like someone else is going through challenges as well. And I can relate to them, even if, different roles, different genders, different age. I know someone else is being challenged right now as well. And it isn't just me. And so for a lot of younger folks, that manifests as just overwhelming, imposter syndrome. And they feel like I don't belong because everybody else is so successful, because everything I read on LinkedIn and social media is like everybody just thriving and getting promotions and looking great. And now, I'm dealing with these mental health issues because, I've got an extended family to support, and I had a bad review, and they internalize it and don't realize that, everybody has their own journey, and a lot of other people are going through the same things. And so I think the more we can normalize that and share that is really good. And there are easy, kind of low risk ways to do that. And one of the best ways I found at Microsoft was joining a mentor group where you have two mentors, usually 2 or 3 levels above a group. And then the small group environment, then there's a sense of trust there. And you can, sometimes share your struggles. And when you hear someone say, I was wondering, how would you deal with this problem? Because I'm having this challenge with my manager, and it isn't on a social media platform where there's thousands of other people looking, it's just in the small group. And just to have someone else say that can be freeing for you to say, I have that same issue as well, or this is my challenge. And so the more ways we can find to kind of share those experiences and to help people, because as many times as, someone will say, I have that same challenge, oftentimes, someone else will say, I have this other issue, and you'll be like, you know what, I had that exact same issue, but this is how I was able to work through it. And so there's a lot of helping and kind of counseling that happens just between the mentees in those groups. That's just as valuable as what they're learning from the mentors. There's this thing called reverse mentoring where, the more experienced people, they can learn sometimes just as much from listening to these usually younger people, earlier in career people talk about the challenges that they have, because there's often these gaps in experiences and upbringing that, can make communicating and working with other employees, more challenging. And so it goes both ways. And again, it all comes down to just sharing information, being honest, and keeping in mind everybody's going through their own journey. They have their own struggles, and just have enough empathy to, stop and consider before making, a reaction or making a comment that may not be, the kindest thing you can do.
That's such a powerful thing to think about, to be able to stop, consider before you respond, give yourself that space to make a decision, respond thoughtfully. I really appreciate you calling that out. Something else you mentioned a second ago was around reverse mentoring. And I was just wondering if you've participated in it, or if your experience with reverse mentoring has been more from a viewer's perspective.
Yeah, no, I've experienced it both in part of a group session as well as one-on-one. So the organizations I was in, I've been through 3, major reorgs in the past 5 years. And so every org thankfully had a mentor group program. And so I every time I would volunteer both as a mentor and a mentee. So I'm always learning, and I like having the opportunity to be with a group of, a cohort of colleagues that are similar level to me, but then also have the opportunity to talk to people that have, we're at the principal or partner level and learn from them. But at the same time, knowing that I've got more to give back as well. And so when I've been a mentor, it's usually with, early in career folks, and just learning from their experiences and hearing, it's really the same kind of sets of stories. It's like, I've got a difficult manager. I don't see eye to eye with them. They've got unrealistic expectations. And then sometimes, I'd really like to get my next promotion. What do I need to do in order to do that? So it comes back to, these common things that came up, learning from them about their own challenges and knowing that, really, no matter where you are in the company, the same sets of core common problems are there. And so if you can figure out how to solve it for one team or organization, you can probably help people solve it across the company. But when you mentioned reverse mentoring, probably the thing that came immediately to mind was we hired an engineer on my team that I had a formal, mentor relationship with, is just part of getting them onboarded, but as well as just kind of helping them with their career. And so this is one of the best people I was involved in hiring, and it was probably considered to be kind of a non-traditional hire. This was an engineer who had worked in Latin America, had a good solid baseline of networking knowledge, but was not your typical engineer that you would see go through an interview loop, but had a great aptitude to learn and had curiosity. And so we had kind of a really junior position open. It was either a 59 or a 60. And so we hired her, and I wanted to become her mentor and make sure she had a really soft landing. This was the first woman I think that we had ever had on the team, and I wanted to make sure that she had the ability to grow and learn. And she became one of the best engineers on the team, was promoted like twice in 3 years, and really came to thrive. And there wasn't this struggle of bringing in somebody that was mid-career and struggling with learning styles, or like, I already know how to do what you're trying to teach me, I'm just going to do it my way, because our team had very specific ways about how to do things. And this engineer was just super open to learning and became someone I could just say, we need this to happen. Just go ahead and do it. And that's something that you typically would expect of a 63, maybe a 62, but she was, a couple levels below that. And yet she just grabbed onto things and took them, and I could trust her to get things done. So, but that formal mentor relationship just helped me learn a lot about her background and about challenges, and yes, about her own struggles with imposter syndrome. And I learned a lot through that relationship about just how to work as an experienced kind of mentor, an informal lead on the team, which is a role I was in, and just how to effectively manage people in a non-formal way. So there's the role I had was these great ones that you have the opportunity to do, which is like you've got the responsibility to kind of lead folks, but none of the authority. And so those are always challenging to do. And I learned a lot from being her mentor about how to kind of lead folks and get them to do what I want them to do. And she eventually left to pursue a master's degree, and now she's doing successful work in other tech companies. But she really stood out as someone that I learned a lot from, and became one of the best people that I've hired at Microsoft.
It's cool. I like that the thought too about the coachability being such a crucial point. I think it ties into the earlier comment that you made about the three-legged stool that you look at when you're hiring, and those soft skills being just so crucial.
Yeah.
I agree that coachability is just, it's a really valuable skill. A little bit back to salary transparency and the career transparency. A lot of people think about salary and compensation as like this really taboo subject. And I can tell now that you have a penchant, or a willingness, I should say, to be open and transparent and vulnerable with people. But I'm curious, how did you get over that? Like, how did you get over that mental, or was it even a thing? Was it ever even a thing that you thought about, like, oh, should I share this or should I not? But either way, yeah.
It wasn't a hard decision. Again, it was like, I was getting tired of people, talking about it, but not actually doing anything about it. And so, I have a bias towards action. We love to have meetings, and we love to talk about a problem. And, at some point you just got to do the work, you got to do something. And so this is one of those situations where I'm tired of people talking about it. I'm just going to do something. And I had already, I think by that time, developed this attitude of the salary, your bonus, your rating, they're numbers, and they don't define you. And I had, up until that point, published kind of a stock kind of message that I made sure to send to the young Microsoft FTs group on Facebook at rewards time, because there's just a lot of angst about it, how those play out. I made sure to post this. I saved the post and I post it every year. And it was basically, be aware that people are going to be going through a lot of different stuff this time of year. Microsoft gives one reward at the end of the year that summarizes your impact for the entire previous 12 months. And there's a lot riding on that. And so while you may have had an awesome review, other people probably did not. In fact, the system enforces the fact that people are, a certain number of people are going to have really bad reviews. So you are neither as poor of an employee as your bad review, nor are you as great an employee as your good review. So just kind of have this moderation about either celebrating or being too over the top, and just understanding that there's plenty of other people that did not get rewards. In fact, I would say probably most people at Microsoft don't get the rewards they think they deserve. And there's lots of reasons for that. And so just be aware of that. But along with that, these are numbers. They don't define who you are as a person. And really the point that I tried to drive home, that I firmly believe in, is this is just one part of your life. It is not the most important part of it. Hopefully the most important parts are your family at home. If you have a spouse or children, or your mother, your father, siblings, those are the things that really matter in your life. And at the end of my life, if people are standing around at a reception of me and thinking, well, Mike had a great career at Microsoft, but that 1 year, man, he got a 0. That really, if only he did better that year. I mean, that would be an absolute failure. And so the reality is, people, you have this career, and it is not the most important part of what you do in life. It can be the means to a lot of really important ends, but when people talk about doing having this passion and you're changing the world, and I think people get too wrapped up in their career and forget about in my opinion, the more important things which are outside of it. Because once you get wrapped up in that career, then things like reviews and promotions, they can just absolutely break you if they don't go the way you think they do. And I think a lot of people get too wrapped up in that, and it comes down to, these are just numbers. They don't define you. There are lots of ways we can kind of define, what our lives mean and the quality of your life, and you can't summarize those in a set of numbers.
That's a hard perspective to keep. I fully agree with you, by the way. Yeah, at the end of the day, at the end of our lives, we're all going to face that. We're all going to think about what's important and what we really care about, and realize that, oh gosh, these things aren't important. Gosh, for those people who are in the moment, it's really hard to do. But to your credit, I'm thinking through what you've shared with me, and just hearing your experience over the couple of times we've talked now, I think you're really embracing that. I mean, you're really doing a tremendous job at living what you're speaking about. And I'm curious on that note. So, as we're talking about, kind of existential items, a lot of people, when they go through hard times at work, they get a tough rewards. It feels like it's an actual existential threat to their job or to their career. The only people outside of yourself that I've spoken with who have spoken about receiving a 0 rewards connect at the end of their year, have they talked about it like a death knell? And for you, you saw that differently, and maybe because you saw it differently, it turned out differently. But I would just love to hear your thoughts on, one, how you approach that, and related, if there's any aspect of that that happens to go along with what you were. This is like one data point in your life. It doesn't define you. It doesn't define who you are as an employee or as a person. And then ultimately, I think people will be interested to hear how you were able to overcome that, because, we all have ups and downs.
Yeah. No, people do take these numbers very personally, and they look at that number and say, this is me. I got a 0, so I am a failure. And they take that into other parts of their lives, and it can be just absolutely devastating. And there are lots of reasons for that. I mean, for a lot of other people, they have more writing on their job. If they have emigrated here to work at Microsoft, and they're their status in this country is based upon employment, then it becomes really, really important. So you have to understand, for a lot of people, that it does mean a lot more. I understand why some people get very emotional about it, and especially now when the stakes are, so much higher. And the question about, my philosophy about overcoming a bad review, my advice, that became probably the most asked about part of my salary talk was, so how did you recover from that result, and what did you do, and how can you help me do the same? And my advice about that has changed based upon the changes that I've seen at the company over the past couple of years. So when it first happened, I got the ZR, and
ZR is zero rewards.
zero reward. So yeah, it is the lowest reward you can get. It's zero cash bonus, zero stock, zero merit increase.
Wow. Okay.
So you get nothing. And while we don't enforce those rewards now, basically you have a fixed pot of money, and I believe the company still encourages managers to differentiate between their employees. So the high performers, you want to give them lots of money, which means that you've got to take money from other people. So it is a zero-sum game. And before, we kind of made that subtle change in giving some flexibility, it really was a fixed curve. It's referred to as stack ranking, but stack ranking is still here. It's just a little bit more disguised. But yeah, back in the day, if you had like 5 people, one person was getting a 0, one person was getting like the top rewards, and then the other 3 were kind of spread across the middle. It was a fixed curve, and you had to meet that curve at a certain point in the organization. And while we no longer have that fixed curve, you still have that fixed budget, and so you've got to make the numbers add up. In order to reward your strong employees, you've got to give really poor results to some people, and so it's going to come around eventually, I think, to most people if you have a long enough career. And when I had this results, I was pissed off and upset because it did come as a surprise. It blindsided me. I thought I was doing the correct work that needed to get done. There was a miscommunication between myself and my manager and my M2, my manager's manager, about what was expected of me. So I had meetings after the fact with both of them to just understand what it was that I missed. As it turns out, my manager at the time left the company, within a few months. And so I transitioned to a different M2, and then within a year, a different M1. So I had 3 managers over the course of a year, which is not uncommon at Microsoft when, a manager leaves and they can't backfill them immediately. But just having that new perspective of having a different manager come in and look at my past performance and go, what I've heard about you and what I've observed doesn't match up with the rewards I see. So let's work on what we can do to make sure that, we correct whatever needs to be corrected going forward so you can have a more successful career. And that was just instrumental in me recovering and knowing that I had the support of leadership to move forward. It wasn't just, you've got a crappy result, so you might as well start looking for another job. And by the way, it can't be at Microsoft because you can't move internally if you've got a 0 rewards result. So, that was super important. And my attitude was, okay, I've got to do better than this. And I turned it around. I had a decent review the next year, and then actually the second year after that 0 rewards year, I got my promotion to senior that I had been, trying and striving towards for many years. And it came with new managers, but a new attitude, a new approach to things. And certainly, I think by that time I had gone through like another 2 kind of minor reorgs. And so just different shifts in perspective were instrumental in helping me kind of reestablish what it was I wanted to do. And then having a new manager who has no past history with you. And when you deliver at a certain level and they see what it is you're capable of, that isn't, they're not viewing that in the context of, well, you struggled here. And so is this what I'm seeing is actually your true capability or your true capacity? I didn't have to deal with that. So The second time it happened, this was in 2023. So yeah, I've gotten 0 awards at Microsoft twice, which is probably not unheard of, but probably not too common because yeah, the common perception is, one ZR and you're going to be fired or you're going to move on because you know that your time is limited. But having recovered and then having had several really successful years, in 2023, we're still recovering from the pandemic. And this is where, I talk about some personal struggles that I've learned along the way that a lot of other people went through during the pandemic, where we were isolated and our work habits changed. And Microsoft did some really good research about just how people's work schedules change. And, it was really a 3-shift type of day where you'd wake up, do some meetings, you take a longer break in the middle of the day, hopefully get out of the house, you do some more work in the afternoon, but then after dinner or after you saw your family, there would be this third shift that a lot of people did later at night just to catch up on work that they didn't get to during the day. And so I did that, and it started, it eventually morphed into, 10 o'clock when the family's going to bed. Man, that was really among the most productive parts of my day because nobody else was, or very few other people were online, and I could do uninterrupted work in my office. And so, but along with that came some, bad habits. I was sleeping in my office because I was working in my office. It made sense that I was also just going to sleep here so I wouldn't disrupt my wife and the rest of my family because they were doing their own thing. Our daughter was doing remote schooling, but I was spending all this time in the office and really not getting out. And I was isolated. One of the things that actually was healthy at first, that we started doing during the pandemic was we started doing kind of craft cocktailing at home. But that morphed into me having a drink with that third shift at night. And then that became a really slippery slope for me. And it became, 1 drink and then 2 and then 3. And then I was waking up most mornings after with a hangover. And that became a really, really big problem because I was abusing alcohol, and I struggled for that year. And it came to a head in 2023 where I struggled to deliver some work. I missed a deadline that happened at the very end of the year. So there was some recency bias, and I got the ZR, and really that kind of brought a head to these really poor habits that I had developed. And, it was definitely a come to Jesus type moment for me personally and my family. And so changed a lot of habits, like some overnight, some over the period of, 4 or 5 months. But, fixing my sleep so that I actually, went to bed at a reasonable hour, got good sleep. That involved getting diagnosed with sleep apnea, getting a CPAP, which totally, was a massive game changer for me, getting quality sleep and finding out with quality sleep, 6.5 or 7 hours, I was functioning really, really well. And I didn't have those afternoon nulls where I was nodding off after lunch. Those just went away. Obviously, stopping drinking for, that first 6 months was a big part of it as well, establishing trust with my wife. And then later on, getting a formal diagnosis for ADHD and getting some meds and really finding out what it means to be able to just start a day and just being able to focus for several hours consecutively. And that was just a massive game changer for me. And so within, like I said, 4, 5, 6 months, my work approach and my ability to focus and my impact was 180 degrees. It was completely changed. And so I figured, I got a 0, but hey, I've fixed a lot of things and I'll be fine going forward. And as often happens, it's, it seems to be a common thing. Well, you got a 0, you're not going to get 150 or 180. You're not going to have a massive change in review. You get kind of middling, or at Microsoft, what would be 100. I got an 80. And what I found out anecdotally was a lot of people kind of got an 80. And the message that they got from management was, 80 is kind of like the new 100,
Mhm.
and 80 is kind of like meets expectations, but you're not getting the full rewards for your level. But I've heard from a lot of folks that said, yeah, I got an 80 and I was told, 80 is the new normal. So I'm like, okay, I just had a ZR. I get that. By then I was really locked in and focusing, and I got assigned what turned out to be kind of a 9-month long project, but highly impactful. And I took that, and along with a lot of other work that I was doing at the time, but I ran that, and if you ask my team, I was absolutely kicking ass that year. I was focused, locked in. I was doing a lot of really good work, and not just to help deliver projects like that, but doing mentoring work on the team and filling in gaps, and writing documentation that was missing, and doing a lot of other good work. Really, I felt like I was having the best year at Microsoft in probably 6 or 7 years easily.
Wow.
So I figured I was on track to fully recovering, and I was expecting, the jury is still out, but I was expecting, a really good reward result. And then, this was, late 2024, early 2025, and we started doing these performance-based layoffs. And I was, kind of keeping track of, so who are they laying off? And it was like, well, people with ZRs or 60. But it was always like, people that have had poor reviews for 2 years. So they were looking back 2 years, and I'm like, okay, so I'm looking at my last 2 years and thinking 80 and a 0. So yikes. In the spring, yeah, they were talking about this next round of layoffs, and there's lots of rumors that fly around, but one of them was, okay, the next cohort of people that they're going to look at are, people with an 80 or below for 2 years running. And so I'm like, well, that kind of, I certainly fall into that cohort of people. And while, I can't say for sure what part of, that criteria ended up, factoring into the algorithm that HR ran, or whether I was just viewed as an expensive employee because I was older, I had a family, I used a lot of health benefits. But yeah, I was part of that May 13th cohort that wasn't fired for performance, but whose positions were eliminated. So, and my whole focus the past year had been to get to this project, wrap it up. I had wrapped it up, had really, really good feedback from it. And I was thinking, I just need to get to August to get my rewards, and I could kind of, roll off that bad review from 2 years ago, because this seemed to be the criteria the company was using to determine, who to let go. And I just, I kind of ran out of time. And it was, when it was announced, a lot of people were shocked, because at least in my case, the decisions seemed to have been made based upon things that happened, up to a year and a half or 2 years ago. And it was not in any way reflective of my performance or impact that I was currently having. And so a lot of people on the team were like, what's going on?
Mhm.
You are one of the best employees on the team. You help so many others out. You're delivering lots of great impact in terms of just metrics, in terms of, pull requests and stuff. You're doing everything that was being asked of you. And now, you're let go. And so there was a lot of shock from folks on my team. And I got emails that were saying, Mike, I thought I understood what I needed to do in order to be successful at Microsoft. And I've been here 3 years, and now I saw what happened to you, and I don't know, I don't know what's going on, because I saw one of the strongest employees on our team, person that, mentored lots of other people and did a lot of the, dirty work to kind of hold the team together. And now you're gone. So what's going on? And I think shock is still there. I think the subsequent layoffs that have happened have just contributed to this overall feeling of, there's no security anymore. We don't know when the next round of personnel decisions are going to be made. And so people don't feel safe. They don't feel comfortable. And that leads to, just a lot of stress. And it's not a good time to be at the company. And so the further away I get from that May 13th date, the more I realize it was probably a good thing that happened to me.
That's not an easy conclusion to come to. And I can tell by the way you described it that there was some heavy processing and things that go into that. And I also, thanks for, sharing and your own personal experiences on how you handled, in some ways that it obviously worked out really well, but just some ways that had some adverse impacts on you. You talked about coping with your mental health, and working through that with the best ways that you could in the moment. I know that was a hard time for a lot of people, and there's still a lot of hard times for people. And so again, I think that's another example of something that people are going to appreciate being able to hear, because, somebody right now is having a hard time. Somebody right now is, waking up and a little hungover and not feeling like they want to. And so anyway, I appreciate you talking through that. So thanks.
That resonated. I mean, yeah, that was a lot of great feedback from folks that really appreciate that honesty, because I know that a lot of the folks that were listening to that final salary doc, yeah, they were probably struggling with some of the same things. I mean,
Yeah.
the impacts of the pandemic and the ways we change doing business are, those are going to be seen for years and years and years. And so, again, if I could kind of normalize talking about that and say, yeah, I've been successful, but I have this really, really rough patch, and I had some struggles. If I can, if that helps out one person to let them know that, hey, I'm not struggling alone, then it's absolutely totally worth it. And I've heard some really powerful stories from folks via DMs and email that what I've shared was really important and made a difference to them. So
I
it
echo
was
that. It
the
is
best
important.
feedback I could get.
I'm really glad. I'm glad that people took the time to reach out to you, because I mean, I agree. It is really, really important. You mentioned the continued layoffs, and something that I've been thinking about is, you talked about this early experience with working in a unionized environment, really, really young, in retail and grocery. And I'm curious, it feels like when talks of layoffs come around, that there's these in tech, that there's these rumblings, or murmurings, I should say, about people saying, oh, well, maybe tech employees should start a union. I've read articles about it and such.
Hmm.
And I'm curious what your thoughts are on that. And has it changed at all with regards to unionization in large tech firms?
I love that question. I am a huge proponent of unions, and I think the union movement that started in the early 20th century was one of the best things to happen to this country. I mean, it was clear at the time. I think it's even clearer now that benefits to labor do not come without struggle, without demands. And at the time, it was literal bloodshed that happened in order to guarantee things like things that we take advantage for today. A 5-day work week. The right to organize, and just basic rights that we take for granted now, and that the fact that they are so much under attack by big business and other factions, I think is a good clue that they're important for people. And so I thought a bit about would it be beneficial? I think overall it would be beneficial. Maybe now more than in the past. At least initially, yes, a job in tech was, a ticket to success. When they're handing out stock options, you were guaranteed to be a millionaire and you could retire, relatively comfortable. And now, let's not kid ourselves, they're still really high paying jobs, but companies have certainly found ways to kind of game the system, to manipulate folks, to get the most out of the workforce. It does tend to ebb and flow, where it's either a strong in favor of job seekers, and they could demand lots of great benefits, large sign-on bonuses, etc. But we're certainly seeing the opposite end of that curve now, where a lot of people are out of work, and there are a lot of folks having struggles with just getting interviews and things. And so I think, to answer your question, certainly people should be allowed to unionize. I think it would be, beneficial to a lot of sectors, a lot of parts of the tech sector. I don't know which roles would be best suited towards it, but I think it would ensure that, kind of minimum levels of benefits are ensured for employees. And more importantly, it would protect employees from, discriminatory and some of the abuses that employers can inflict upon employees. And it's, as much as companies like to say, we're a family, even ones that previously had, really, really strong reputations. And I would count Microsoft among this. I thought the company did a lot of really good work during the pandemic, but we've made some really questionable decisions. And now with seemingly, rolling layoffs and, really just really bad looks, like our head sales guy decided to take a 2-month sabbatical when he knows we're about to just riff another, I don't know how many, 5, 6, 7,000 people in the sales org. That's just a really bad look. And it shows that the company doesn't care about, their strongest resource, which are the employees that work for them. So I think there needs to be stronger checks. And certainly in this political climate, it's not going to come from the government. Companies are kind of having a free hand to do what they want with their workforce, and having a way to check that that power on the employee side is important. So I don't know what that means. Part of my salary talk includes a slide about how organization around unions has grown recently, and there's been some really important gains in terms of unionization at Starbucks stores, at Amazon warehouses, and that it's important, and that it's a big deal because those companies have done just in some cases illegal things in order to prevent those things from happening. Firing organizers and just doing really crappy things in order to prevent that from happening. So if the company is spending that much effort to prevent it from happening, then it's something that they do not want to see, and is probably in the best advantage of their employees to pursue. So
Appreciate that. You mentioned your salary talk just now, and for anyone who's listening to this, who'd like to catch the whole thing, is there a place where people can, jump on and catch that, or is it published anywhere?
it is. I recorded that final session. I recorded the first 2 years as well, but really the final year has all the information from the previous session, and it's only grown and grown and grown. So I do have a link that's published to my personal OneDrive that I'll make sure is included. Every single slide has, basically my narrative for how I'm talking about what happened at that time. So,
Oh, thank you. Thank you. In the presentation, something that stood out to me is that you mentioned a couple of charities, and I was just curious from my own view, and it felt like there was a story there with some of those charities, or were they just organizations that you believe in, or?
at the beginning, yeah, after the first time I realized, hey, this is something that's kind of big. So let's, I like taking advantage or using an opportunity to do good. And so one of the things I did at Microsoft was, when I got more involved with philanthropy and charity, we would have, bring in a charity to talk about whatever their cause was. And if I could get some leaders on the call, I would put them on their gun and say, listen, I'm going to put a challenge out to you. I'm going to donate whatever. At the time I still have a donor advised fund. And so I would say, here's $1,000 towards it. I want to see the leaders on this call match it, because I know you can. I know how much more money you make. And so
Yeah.
I have no problems calling people and, basically speaking truth to power. And so there's a slide in the deck that encourages people. And I say, I make it clear, I'm not expecting anything. I do this because I love doing this. I think it's important to share. But if you want to give something back, then here's some charities. And I list a few there. Probably the most important one for me that has the most personal connection is Bloodworks Northwest. So formerly Puget Sound Blood Center. I'm a regular blood donor and have been since 1993. I mentioned in passing, I got really sick in the early 90s with ulcerative colitis, and I had to have a blood transfusion in the hospital.
Yeah.
So that saved my life. And I made kind of a promise to myself, I'm going to repay that, many times over. And so my goal is to donate 100 units, and I'm at around 70, I think, right now. So
Cool.
Donating blood or platelets or plasma they're people talk about, doing good work that saves someone's life. This is something you can do that literally saves people's lives. And it isn't just most of the blood that gets donated isn't used for like trauma events or people in car crashes. It's for things like people that are undergoing treatments for cancer and they need regular transfusions. And so it's super important to do. Only, I think, 3% of eligible donors actually donate.
Wow.
And yet it is so easy to do. It's about an hour, hour and a half end to end. And you can do this, I think, about every 100 days for whole blood. You can do it more frequently for platelets, but it is something that I am massively passionate about. And I wish more people did. And they make it easy. If you work at a large company like Microsoft, Bloodworks Northwest regularly has blood drives. They will bring the bus on campus. They make it easy as walking out of your office into the bus and just taking it out of your day to do this vitally important and literally life-saving thing. So,
Awesome.
and that's one way. You don't need to even give the money. You're giving something that you cannot buy right now, which is blood, and there's no viable synthesis to human blood, and so it's something you don't need to do with a large fund or make a large monetary donation. It's simply your time, and fortunately Microsoft still they match that time. So every time I go in and donate,
Oh, wow.
Microsoft matched that for every hour I did it. And that's a great thing.
I love the creative ways that people find to leverage that time matching. It's really, I think that has really a fairly wide reaching impact. In specific people's lives. I like that a lot. Well, this has been awesome. I really, really have enjoyed this conversation. Before we end, I just want to ask, we spent a good amount of time talking about mentoring, and I was curious if there are younger people who are listening to this, maybe just early in tech or hoping to get into tech. If you have any parting words of wisdom for those folks, piece of advice.
Well, first of all, feel free to reach out to me. I'll put in my LinkedIn URL, so you feel free to connect to me. And folks often feel more comfortable asking questions, personally one-on-one versus a group setting. And so I'm more than happy to have conversation with folks if they have questions about my talk. I definitely love to get your feedback on whether doing something like this for a broader audience, maybe something like an AMA on Reddit would be impactful or be worth my time. I guess my final, piece of advice, it sounds kind of trite, but just be nice to people out there. It's just a difficult time to be if you're in tech. And I think it's only going to get more and more difficult because I think the layoffs we're seeing are the start of a trend, and the folks that were impacted earlier this year, or even as part of the May cohort, I think we probably got out early, and I think it's going to get busier and busier with people looking for work for, a shrinking number of jobs. And so help out where you can, open up your networks to folks so that they can leverage your contacts, and really that's the best way I think people will be able to find new opportunities. I heard something like 80% of jobs that people get are through personal networks, about getting your resume in the hands of the people doing the hiring versus just sending a resume off to a hiring portal and then hoping for the best. Especially with advances in AI, it's becoming absurdly easy to just flood the environment with applications and resumes, and trying to get your resume. It's like finding a needle in a haystack. So
true.
Open those networks to folks. If you can make a connection between a role that you know about and someone that might be a good fit, I mean, that could change someone's lives. So just be aware of those opportunities, and keep your eyes and ears out, and take care of each other, because it's super important to do that now more than I think ever.
I think that's a really great piece of advice to end this on. Be kind. I love that. You're right. It doesn't cost you anything. You only benefit from it. Everybody benefits from it. And look, I super, super appreciate that. I like your also thoughts about the potential AMA. Let's talk separately about that. But
Sure.
I think it's a great idea. And look, Mike, this has been awesome. I really, really enjoy this. Thank you so much for being vulnerable and sharing your open perspective. Thanks for really leading the charge here. Salary transparency. It feels like there's lots of conversation about it where people are anonymous, but I love that you're being willing to just, hey, this is me. This is how it works. And anyway, really enjoyed this. Thanks so much, Mike. Really appreciate you.
Thanks for reaching out to me as well. It's been a fantastic experience sharing this. And I'm happy to just do this again in another format or a different topic, because it's incredibly gratifying to know that people want to hear your story and can learn from it and take something away from it. So I'm super happy to be able to share it with you and your audience.
Awesome. Thanks, sir. Really appreciate it. Talk to you soon.
Bye-bye.
4Fs with Jeff.